Story number 1. I have always been drawn towards the creepy and the unexplained. I read horror forums late into the night, collected photos of allegedly haunted places, and watched found footage movies alone in my room with the lights off. That's why, when my friend Jai suggested we should try a Ouija board one rainy Saturday, it didn't take much to convince me. The idea sounded almost childishly cliched, but there was comfort in ritualizing the unknown, in pretending we had any control over it. Jai's family owned an old house not far from my apartment, with a basement that smelled of damp, rust, and lost things. It was the perfect setting, or so I thought then. The afternoon rain drummed steadily on the pavement as we slipped inside, carrying a brand new Ouija board in its crinkly packaging, and a couple of candles from Jai's pantry for the atmosphere. The overhead bulb flickered, making the shadows around the stone walls uneasy. We set up on an old wooden table. The basement's cold seeped through my jeans, prickling against my skin. For a moment, a quiet doubt fluttered in me, but it was soon drowned by expectation. Everything felt both staged and real. Jai grinned, shrugging off the tension. Our hands pressed to the planchette, and for the next 40 minutes, nothing really happened. The only sound was the occasional throaty gurgle of pipes. If it had ended there, all I'd have from that day was a story about boredom and the power of suggestion. But then I noticed something. A small thing at first, that never left. The overhead bulb began to pulse gently, at first like a heartbeat, then in frantic spasms. Light, darkness, light, making the shapes of stored furniture lurch and falter. I mentioned it to Jai, a nervous humor in my voice. He looked at me with mild confusion, said the lights were fine, and asked if I was feeling okay. He even snapped his fingers in front of my face. The bulb burned steady. When I blinked, it was as if it had never flickered. That was the first thing, the only thing, for a skeptic, that could easily be written off as nerves. Maybe a migraine brewing, or the afterimage of too many late nights spent staring at screens. But things didn't stop there. As the rain thudded harder against the blocked-out window wells, I began to feel a cough of cold air behind my neck, even though there weren't any vents I could see. My skin prickled, a low-grade static, and my breath made little clouds in the air. Jai didn't seem to notice, sipping his soda and poking fun at the planchette's stubborn stillness. I kept glancing over his shoulder, a metallic taste on my tongue. It happened when I watched the wall behind Jai, a trick of the eye at first. The darkness seemed to ripple, a deeper black seeping through, sinuous movements like oil on water. The edges of the shadows began to curl, almost to crawl, reaching from where the wall met the floor in slithering patterns. My heart hammered against my chest. My hands were ice. Dread ebbed in waves, followed by humiliation. I tried to rationalize it, like the tricks of peripheral vision, undiagnosed floaters, or maybe a muscle spasm pulsing in one eye. Still, the crawling blackness didn't go away. When I forced myself to look directly, the shapes fluttered and hung on the edge of seeing. Gone, then back when I shifted my gaze. They crept closer, always behind Jai, always threatening to swallow him. I finally stammered something about what I saw. Jai only laughed, told me I was being ridiculous, and pointed behind him. There was only the pitted wall and a leaning shelf. I wanted to scream. How could he not see this creeping, howling darkness with its terrible, silent intent? Panic rose, bubbling with the impression that the air itself thickened, congealing in my lungs. I shut my eyes, squeezed them until sparks danced across my vision. And then, in the close silence, I heard a strange sound. A wet, gurgled giggle, unnaturally high and cold. Every instinct told me not to open my eyes, but I did. Jai was gone. Just that, a sudden subtraction, like a glitch in reality. The old chair he'd sat on stood empty, swaying as if touched. There was no wind. I was suddenly, utterly alone. I shouted Jai's name. The room threw my voice back at me, a hollow mimicry. The door was bolted from the inside. Any attempt I made to force it was pointless. The latch refused to yield, feeling hot and alive beneath my fingers. The room felt darker, denser, shadows wrapping around me like a suffocating embrace. When I turned, Jai stood in front of me, suspended, hovering just above the table. At first, my mind rebelled, refusing to process the proportions of his body. His eyes were rolled back, mouth yawned open into a terrible, too-wide smile. His hands had become warped, fingers curving into claws. Teeth, jagged, almost reptilian, flashed in that grotesque grin. I froze, breath torn from me in ragged gasps. The the sound of my heartbeat throbbing in my ears like heavy drums. He seemed to watch me, head tilting with an insect's curiosity. In the silence, I heard my own pulse. The next moment, he lunged for me, a kaleidoscope of impossible motion, and the world melted into whirling black. The next thing I remember is blinking up at Jai's ceiling. I was upstairs, lying on his living room couch. The lights were warm, familiar. Jai was there, scrolling through his phone, casting me a worried glance. He said I'd fainted on the steps, eyes open but unresponsive. He teased me for getting spooked by a boring session. My limbs trembled. My tongue was thick with the memory of copper and cold. I barely heard him. The memory of the basement, the shape his body took, the chilling smile, it gnawed at me. I told him what I saw. He only repeated that I'd gone pale and vanished from the basement for a while, leaving him calling out, searching, until he found me half collapsed on the stairs. On the ride home, drops of rain chased one another down my windshield, the radio muttering beneath my shallow breaths. At a stoplight, I checked my mirror. For a heartbeat, Jai's warped reflection stared back. Pale, eyes rolled, too many teeth splitting a lopsided grin. I spun around. The back seat was empty. Only the faint scent of old incense and damp air clung to my clothes. I barely slept that night, tossing in sweat-sticky sheets, every creak in my apartment twisting my nerves tighter. The next morning, I awoke to find vivid marks ringing both arms, bruises patterned like a tightening grip, not quite human nor animal. No explanation offered itself. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. I keep my skepticism, reminding myself of fainting spells, tricks of exhaustion, or strange electrical faults. I don't tell people the story because there's always a way to dismiss the impossible. But sometimes I see something flicker behind me in darkened mirrors. Sometimes, when sleep hovers just out of reach, I feel the shape smiling, an inch beneath my skin. Story number 2. Most summers at Grandma's house were slow, dull, and sticky with the humidity you only get in the Midwest farmland. My sister Anna and I spent them inventing reasons to be scared. She'd dare me to peek into the attic or listen for ghost trains at midnight, stories meant to make boredom bearable. The night with the Ouija board wasn't supposed to be different. Anna had found it crammed behind old moth-eaten coats in my grandmother's mothball closet. The box was cracked at the corners, bent from years of being pressed under other forgotten things. The planchette, a little plastic heart with a faded glass lens, was so yellowed it looked like old teeth. She bounced up and down until I caved. We set the board on the porch because none of us wanted to do it inside. Anna, me, and our cousins, Dana and Michael. Grandma's porch had a single bulb caged in with wire, splashing orange over our knees. Beyond the porch rail was woods, more silent at night than I can explain. The trees pressed close together like people holding in a secret. It was August, so the air was alive with bugs, but underneath was something quieter, heavier. We took turns asking the board if anything was here. At first, nothing. The planchette sat dully in the center. Dana, restless as ever, started mocking, saying silly things like, if there was a ghost, it should knock something over. The timing was probably a coincidence. A sudden gust, the porch floor creaking. But then the old ceramic angel on the shelf tumbled off and shattered in a way that felt deliberate. We all jumped, laughing it off, but my arms prickled as I picked up the broken wing. My parents, if I'd asked later, would have blamed the wind or a squirrel on the roof. I wanted to believe that, but the porch was dead still, and the angel had sat there unmoved all summer. Anna's question came next. She asked about our great-uncle who drowned in the river, which curled behind the yard. His death was a family shadow. We weren't supposed to talk about it. The planchette didn't move for almost a minute, and then slowly, with all our tiny fingers hovering, it spelled B-O-A-T. I heard Michael scoff, but Anna's eyes grew wide. That much maybe was an educated guess. Everyone knew there was a river, a drowned uncle, probably a boat. Then the board spelled L-O-O-K-A-T-T-R-E-E. We debated about this for a while, but nobody wanted to quit. The tension was a rope stretching between us. By morning, any courage we had was brittle and small, but we went anyway. Barefoot, tense, bracing against the dew. Past the swing set and the edge of the yard, the ground fell away to a narrow path leading to the river bend, just out of sight of the house. The tree nearest the bend was old and broad, with bark whirled like ripples. It took me a minute to see it. A deep wound spiraled in the trunk, as if someone had hacked at it years ago. Wedged inside the hollow was a rusted, split scrap of a boat oar. My heart hit my ribs so hard I stepped back instinctively. My cousin said it could have been there forever, that maybe the tree grew around it. Later, I wondered if I'd heard my parents talk about that accident and misremembered. The mind is tricky. Still, I didn't tell them, and neither did Anna. After that, things changed, especially for Anna. She started to sleepwalk. She never had before. I'd wake at strange hours and hear someone moving, the hush of feet on floorboards. The first night, I found her at the edge of the porch, her face vacant, skin glowing milk white in the porch light. Her eyes were open but sightless. She didn't shiver, even though the air was sharp with dawn. She just stood, arms limp at her sides, looking out at the tree by the river like she was waiting. Every few nights it happened again. I didn't always catch her in time. My mother blamed me for scaring her with ghost stories. Sleepwalking, she explained, was just an anxious brain trapped between dreaming and waking. But Anna wasn't like herself in those moonlit walks. Sometimes she muttered, words too soft to catch. Sometimes she reached out toward the riverbank, as if squeezing the darkness for an answer. I couldn't sleep. I started to dread the quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a presence. One night I followed Anna barefoot outside. The trees pressed in, silver in the moonlight, insects muffled by something heavier. She walked, not like a little kid, stumbling or blinking, but deliberate, bare feet sure on the cold grass. She stopped at the wounded tree and just stared up at the ragged gash, her nightgown trailing behind her like a ghost herself. Gradually, the sleepwalking faded. Anna started waking up in her bed again, though she was tired for weeks, dark circles blooming under her eyes. My parents said she was just going through a phase, a growing mind, a restless summer, too much sugar, too little supervision. I tried to believe it. The board went back in the closet and school started again. Life got ordinary, but I never forgot the cold glassiness of Anna's eyes, the strange carved wound on that tree, that fragment of ore rusting in its gnarled heart. At night, when the house is silent, I think about the evening wind, the angel tipping off the shelf, the way Anna's fingers curled around the planchette. My parents insist we worked ourselves up, desperate to invent mysteries. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's better that way. Still, some part of me hears the hush of river water, sees the white drift of a nightgown at 2 a.m., and wonders what called Anna to the tree, or what was calling back. I don't look too closely anymore, and I never ask about the Ouija board. Some games, even if they're just games, are better left in the closet with the dust. Story number 3. I was always the cautious one, the observer, the one who weighed consequences while others dived right in. My friends in high school loved to push the limits, always searching for that jolt of adrenaline, some forbidden thrill in the restless city nights. Maybe it was the monotony of neon lights and traffic that made us crave the strange. When Sam arrived with that thrift store Ouija board, tucked under his arm like a cursed relic, I already felt something amiss just from its warped wooden frame and greasy plastic planchette, the kind of object that looked too used, almost wounded. The plan wasn't novel. Urban explorers came to the abandoned psychiatric hospital every year, sometimes for dares, sometimes just to prove they could. But mixing spirits in such a place sounded ill-advised even to my skeptical ears. Yet I said nothing when the group decided to sneak out that Friday night, adrenaline eclipsing my unease. The hospital loomed ahead, 20 minutes out of the city, gutted and skeletal against the moonless sky. Barbed wire fences sagged uselessly, brick walls now patchworks of moss and graffiti. The 6 of us, Sam, Jenny, Clara, Kim, David, and myself, draped ourselves in bravado. Yet as we entered, I felt the air shift. The cold inside was not the coolness of empty halls, but something heavier, pressing in from above. Every footstep echoed too loud, the silence eating sound with a hunger. We found a room with tar-stained wallpaper and set up the candles, their flickers cruelly bright in the oppressive gloom. The Ouija board sat between us, the planchette poised like an unwelcome guest. As our fingers hovered, Kim's phone vibrated, and he ducked out, grumbling about reception. The 5 of us ribbed him. Who gets calls in haunted hospitals? We joked that if something supernatural came for anyone, it'd be Kim, always last to take things seriously. That's when the metal bang echoed, a sound so sharp and violent it made my teeth ache. It reverberated through the cracked corridors, rattling paint flakes down like snow. We scrambled up, candles scattering shadows as we rushed into the hallway. The air was thick now, swirling with dust heavy enough to choke. Shapes blurred behind the haze, flashes of movement that always vanished when I focused. Kim wasn't outside. We dared each other toward the sound. Sam and David veering left, Clara and Jenny right, while I, feeling oddly detached, picked a corridor straight ahead. I told myself I wasn't scared. I reasoned that Kim, ever the prankster, was behind it all. Still, every so often, I'd feel footsteps echoing mine a fraction too late, nearly imperceptible breaths tapping the back of my neck. When I turned, only darkness waited. Maybe I imagined the tiny giggle behind the wall, or the hum that seemed to radiate just beyond the narrow beam of my flashlight. But then I heard the sob, shrill, unmistakably human. I found the girl in a corner, knees hugged to her chest, clutching a moth-eaten doll. Her hair looked like cobwebs, tangling into the stuff that pooled at the edges of nightmares. The crying sawed at my nerves, visceral and intrusive. Every bit a wounded child. My light flickered as I raised it. For an instant, her eyes caught the beam and burned red, then shifted back to brown as she wiped her tears. I reasoned that it was my nerves. Light can play tricks. Maybe it was a trick of reflection, a strange pigment, tiredness warping perception. In a voice barely above a whisper, she told me her parents left her here. I felt a surge of something close to guilt, but her words seemed to freeze in the air as I promised to fetch help. Before I could go far, a wet, sticky patter tapped my shoulder. I looked up. Kim was stuck to the ceiling, impossibly upside down, his arms splayed like some grotesque marionette. A rusted nail jutted from his chest, blood snaking down in thick, syrupy drops. The horror was so sudden and visual that for a moment I couldn't move. Then panic punched through the paralysis, and I ran, tripping over debris and my own disbelief. Every corridor seemed to stretch and loop. I called out for the others, my voice frail and trembling. Corridors ahead looked endless, the darkness pooling with every step. I stumbled over something lumpy and soft. I looked down, and my phone's beam outlined Clara. Her forehead was split from hairline to nose, not bleeding, but spilling spiders, hundreds of them, their glistening bodies pouring out and scattering into the grout like spilled beads. My mind reeled between shock and the desperate urge to rationalize. Maybe it was a Halloween prop, I told myself. The others were trying to scare me, that's all. Finally, I found Jenny, Sam, and David huddled behind a broken gurney, pale and shaking. I sputtered about Kim, about Clara. We hurried through the halls back to where I'd seen them. The corridor was now emptier than before. No blood, no body, no girl. Dust settled thickly on the floor, undisturbed. We heard laughter from further down, a horrible, exaggerated sound. Kim and Clara stood side by side where I'd met the little girl, grinning like nothing had happened. No wounds, no terror, just casual amusement. They chalked it up to a joke, swearing they'd tricked me with the old disappear and jump scare routine. Part of me wanted to believe it. I smiled and played along, letting relief numb the edges of what I'd seen. But that wasn't the end. The next day, curiosity gnawed at me. I scoured old newspaper archives and found a story about a patient, the daughter of a nurse, who disappeared from the psychiatric hospital 2 decades ago. Last seen clutching a battered doll, her parents presumed lost her in the maze of halls. Her body was never found. The others moved on except for the occasional nervous joke. But at night, when the city lights flickered and shadows shifted across my ceiling, I sometimes saw a faint, child-sized silhouette standing just by the bedroom door, tiny hands clutching a doll, watching in silence. Maybe a trick of the eyes on tired nights, I told myself. Maybe my mind, shaken by fear, manufactured phantoms. Maybe. Still, even now, I lock my door before I sleep. I avoid mirrors at night, and if I pass by that derelict hospital, I keep my eyes forward, never looking at the highest, darkest windows. I know what I saw, but with just enough doubt to question if it was real, or if haunted places only echo our worst imaginings, feeding on what we bring to them. But that sob, some nights, still gnaws at the edge of my dreams. Story number 4. I had always thought of the county as my childhood's serene retreat, a place where fog sat expectantly on silent fields in the early mornings, where the market street sounded different, the voices gentle and drawn out. My cousin lived there year-round, tucked inside a modest house at the edge, shielded by old trees and a thin wire fence. I'd never been allowed to roam freely when I was little, but now, grown up and unaccompanied, I set out to explore while my cousin worked another long shift at the hospital. The market was a quiet sprawl, cracked pavements, faded signs. The air felt thick, almost syrupy, wrapping around my arms and neck. It was only by chance that I wandered into the narrow alley, a space I didn't remember from any previous visits. There, pressed between a shuttered bakery and an unlit video rental, stood an antique shop. Its door was crooked, and the bell above it never rang when I walked in. Inside, the air was dust-heavy, illuminated by just one greasy yellow bulb. Shadows crowded the corners, folding over shelves where porcelain dolls stared, jaws slack, and picture frames bent at odd, tired angles. Behind the counter, a gaunt man in moth-eaten flannel stared unwaveringly at a spot on the wall, unmoving. His stillness made it unclear whether he even breathed. He certainly didn't react to my entry. The weight of the shop pressed on me, but I moved anyway, browsing. My eyes settled on an old wooden board, its paint long dulled, glyphs chipped and curling away. It reminded me of those stories, a spirit board meant for invoking. Faint letters arched across the top in a language I didn't recognize. There was a tightness in my chest, but my hand moved as if on its own, and I brushed the surface with my fingers. A sudden, sharp jolt burned my palm. I yanked away, dropping the board, which split down the middle with a sound that rang like dry bone. Only then did the shopkeeper turn. His eyes met mine, depthless and black, but the look was more than surprise. It was fixed, a silent recoil. The stare made my scalp prickle. Still, I fumbled through an apology, laid a few bills on the counter, and stumbled to the door, relieved to burst into the cold, thin light outside. The unease clung to me through dinner and into the night. The house creaked. The old floorboards popped as they always had, but that night it all felt closer. I lay awake, curtains drawn, and tried to think of anything else. Not an hour later, the heavy wooden bed beneath me shuddered violently. An unnatural movement, as if someone underneath had lifted it and dropped it back down. I bolted upright. The house was silent. My pulse buzzed in my ears. The days after blurred together. Small, creeping things happened. The bathroom mirror caught glances, shadowy flickers in the periphery that vanished if I looked right at them. Sometimes, brushing my teeth, I'd catch a shape like a hunched figure standing behind my left shoulder. At first, I dismissed these sights as tricks of tiredness or the unfamiliar house, but they continued. Each time I used a mirror, some smudge or flash lingered, like film burned into the glass. The sound of movement followed, the distinct, deliberate shuffling of someone under the bed in the middle of the night. The slow scrape of skin or cloth on the wood. Every night it felt closer. I checked every time, of course, nothing was ever there. The closet door, too, would groan open even when latched, as if disturbed from inside. Late one night, a pulsing ache woke me. Not in my body, but a sensation like my brain vibrating inside my skull. I found myself sitting up, opening the door, stepping barefoot onto the porch. The stone felt cold and real against my feet, but my movements didn't feel my own. The world was silent except for a distant, hollow banging. Awareness drifted in and out, moments I could recollect, but couldn't control. That next morning, bruises bloomed along my forehead. My cousin's face was pale, frightened, as she told me I'd been found outside at 2 a.m, rhythmically pressing my head against the brick wall. She said I'd said nothing, just kept hitting my forehead, slow and steady, as if following a song only I could hear. It became routine. Nearly every night, the neighbors' dogs would start to bark, and I would be found outside, reenacting the same mute, trance-like display, despite all my efforts to stay in bed. Each morning, memories were sparse, a numbness, a hazy sensation of being watched. My cousin confessed she was scared to fall asleep in case she woke to find me standing over her. Things worsened. One night she waited, pretending to sleep, but in fact she watched. Her account filled in my gaps. I rose mechanical and barefoot, slipped outside without a word, and started walking. My cousin, afraid but determined, followed from a distance through the flickering streetlights all the way to that alley. The antique shop glowed with the dull yellow light still burning inside. She saw me move toward the street, toward the shop's warped front window, just as a delivery truck, headlights doused, barreled towards me. Only her shout snapped me out of it. I was dazed, cold, her hand gripping my arm just as the headlights curved around us and the shop beyond faded black. I remembered nothing of the journey or the near accident. My cousin's expression gave away the rest. I had almost sleepwalked directly to my death. After that night, she insisted I leave. There was no debate. It was for my safety. Whatever was happening, she said, it wasn't going to end well if I stayed. I was too shaken to argue. The day I left, the county receded behind a veil of mist. As the city's noise filled my world again, the strangeness seemed to recede too. The banging, the flickering shadows in mirrors, the sensation of being watched, all became memories, though never fully explained. I was left with a lingering discomfort, a subtle sense that the county's fog and silence had not loosened their grip. Sometimes, under certain city lights, reflections in glass move just a beat slower than I do. Once, long after, I woke to find a faint red mark above my eyebrow, as though I had been pressing my head, once more, into something hard, something waiting. I tell myself the sleepwalking could be stress, the visions a play of tired nerves, the antique board's shock a trick of static. I tell myself all of this, but the feeling remains. There are places, I think, that cling to you. A quiet county, a dusty shop, a set of eyes that turn toward you when you look away. Places that watch and sometimes want to be remembered. Story number 5. They say when you move to a new house, the walls remember how lonely you are. Clouds drifted permanently above our roof the first month after we shifted. Gray, heavy, uncertain. It had all started on my 12th birthday. My parents, in their attempt to attack my loneliness with numbers, invited all the neighborhood children. None of them stayed in my memory except for one. While cake and balloons colored the afternoon, I couldn't stop glancing at the boy sitting apart in the farthest corner of the yard. He looked drained of life, his skin a dull, waxy white, eyes flat as polished marbles. He seemed untouched by the world, barely breathing, a chilling blankness about him that drew me in. I remember approaching him, compelled more by the strangeness than any wish for friendship. As I neared, an odd coldness attacked my face, so abrupt and sharp that it made my teeth ache. I offered my hand, and when his fingers wrapped around mine, I flinched at how bizarrely icy they were, colder than a block of ice. His grip was vice-like, pressing bone against bone until it nearly hurt, and then he smiled, or at least tried to. Too many teeth, small and pointed, and the mouth just wide, wider than I'd ever seen. Among the gifts wrapped in garish paper was a pink and blue Ouija board. No one admitted to bringing it, though for a moment I caught the pale boy watching me open it, that too-wide smile flickering. After that, the boy became a fixture at my house. He'd appear without warning, sitting by the stairwell or in the corner of my room, always watching yet rarely speaking. I must have taken to him, for I stopped seeking other friends, spent afternoons talking to him or listening to him hum tunelessly. My parents grew anxious, their eyes lingering too long every time he was near, their voices tense afterward, as if discussing a fever they didn't dare name. I thought they were just being odd. Things gradually got wrong. That's the only word for it. I'd wake up to find dried, rust-colored stains flecking my hands and arms. No matter how hard I scrubbed, they wouldn't disappear, as if they seeped up from the skin itself. The smell sometimes turned metallic, sweet and sickening. Mud would pack itself into the soles of my shoes, gritty and wet, even on days I never left the house. My mother would find sodden footprints in the hallway, trailing inward from the locked back door, and look at me with accusatory confusion. I always told the truth. I hadn't gone out. It made no difference. The attic above my room was a forbidden zone, heavy with dust and old furniture from another family's nightmares. Yet one afternoon, trying to distract myself from the stains and the boy's silent watching, I found myself rummaging up there. Scattered among crates was a battered teddy bear, odd, not cuddly, crude stitches where its mouth should be, the eyes mismatched buttons staring in opposite directions. Something about it was utterly wrong, as if it was sewn with bitter intentions. My hands trembled involuntarily when I touched it. I tossed the bear in the trash pile at the curb that very day. By nightfall, it was sitting on my pillow. The next morning, it peered from my sock drawer. Sometimes it would appear right outside the bathroom when I opened the door, the stitch smile wider with each return. Every time I tried to get rid of it, it found its way back, becoming more worn and damp each time. Once I found its fur sticky, as if something dark had soaked and dried there. That winter, a night arrived when I woke shivering, thick laughter echoing, the kind of giddy, vicious giggling that scares more than it amuses. Half asleep, I followed the sound to the upstairs veranda, the forbidden one outside my old bedroom. Moonlight coming through the window was bruised and pallid, and there the boy was, crouched and giggling, the broken bear held like a prize. He seemed at home in the moonshadow, rocking back and forth. When he patted the ground beside him, the boards nearly groaned. I remember feeling a pull, not so much an invitation as a demand. My steps carried me to the edge, a cold breeze rattling the window panes and making the hairs on my arms stand. The world seemed detached, the railing behind my knees rough, the ground too far below. I believe I felt his hand on my shoulder, clammy, crushing, and just then my mother's distant, panicked call floated to me, breaking whatever trance held me. The veranda was empty when I turned around, bear and boy both gone. My mother's anger at my wandering paled next to the tremor I felt inside. After that night, the boy stopped visiting so often. Sometimes, though, his presence hung in the dark corners of my room, a cold spot on my bed, muddy smears inside locked drawers, the bear inside a shoe for days, no matter how many times I burned or buried it. Word crept around school that I was strange. When I asked the neighborhood kids about the pale boy, their faces puckered with discomfort. Some claimed I'd played alone on my birthday, talked to myself for hours. My own parents' unease grew. I saw it in the way they avoided my gaze whenever I mentioned my friend. Years stretched on, but the stains never ceased. They just faded, replaced by uneasy dreams. Nights sometimes echo with the scratch of tiny stitches pulling taut, or the rattle of small feet across the attic boards. Painfully clear are the memories of that too-cold hand, the way the air snapped sharp and wet whenever he was near. As an adult, I've read about mass suggestion, childhood solitude, trauma. Maybe those explain the phantom laughter, the hallucinations, the uncanny persistence of that damn bear. Maybe the stains were rust from old plumbing, the muddy shoes the fault of a leaking window. Maybe. It's been more than 30 years. My parents are gone. The house is mine now, the attic empty but for shadows. But sometimes I wake up shivering, the bed sheets bristling with cold. Sometimes when the wind rattles the windows just right, I swear I hear a child's giggle from the veranda. And every now and then, just before I fall asleep, I see the bear's stitched smile in the dark. And I wonder if I ever really returned from that night, or if, somewhere in the chill corners of this old house, the boy is still waiting. Story number 6. I have always prided myself on being rational. As a local reporter, skepticism had to be part of the job. Believe only what you see, verify every fact, question definite truths. Yet what happened last spring pushed the boundaries of my reasoning, and even now as I try to put my experience into words, I find myself trapped somewhere between the comfort of logic and the chilling unknown. It started innocuously enough. My magazine's editor received an anonymous tip. Someone claimed the disgraced film star A.J. Moreno was holed up in our unremarkable suburb after his career imploded in scandal. Moreno was a recluse now, the kind of story that made editors drool. I was tasked with confirmation. My partner Simon and I committed ourselves to an unofficial stakeout, renting an upstairs room across the street, peeking through curtains, taking inconspicuous notes. The star mostly kept to himself. Sometimes late at night, I'd see a dull glow behind his blinds and brief silhouettes moving oddly, hunched. A few times I glimpsed him sitting cross-legged on the floor, his arms laboring over something invisible, head bowed. Once I almost convinced myself I saw him whispering, gesturing toward the darkness at his feet. After several nights of little progress, temptation outweighed judgment. Simon and I decided that if Moreno left for one of his rare night walks, we'd sneak into the house. I can rationalize the guilt. I told myself it was just for the story, that we wouldn't touch anything, that Moreno had long forfeited the right to privacy. But I now wonder if there isn't a darker urge inside all of us, drawing us to things we're better off not knowing. That opportunity came on a mild Thursday just past midnight. Moreno left on foot, disappearing into the shadowy heart of the neighborhood. Simon volunteered to keep watch outside, while I circled around back, found the rarely used service entrance and slipped inside. The house was humid and eerily silent, floorboards creaking, dust swirling in the flashlight beam. Seconds after entering, a metallic, fetid odor assailed me. It was sharp, both acrid and sweet, like spoiled meat left in a tin box. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve, but pressed on. Most rooms were disordered but unremarkable. Boxes stacked wall-high, curtains stapled to windows, the sort of mess a desperate hermit creates. Then I found the locked door at the end of a claustrophobic hall. The knob resisted. The latch didn't budge at first, but on the third try it clicked open. That's when the smell became a physical force, thick as syrup pressing against my lungs. Red light bathed the room, a slick, viscous glow from a twisted lamp in one corner, as if filtered through cheap plastic or blood-streaked glass. On the near wall, a corkboard was pinned with dozens of photographs. Each was a headshot: men, women, adolescents, seniors, faces twisted mid-expression, all strangers. Beneath every photo, a name and a short scribble I could not decipher. My scalp prickled as I realized the handwriting beneath each face seemed frantically scrawled and obsessive. Some lines overwritten until the ink bled, but the floor was worse. At first, I saw only a black star painted on the wood, broad, sticky strips intersecting. In its center displayed a battered Ouija board, the planchette caught between two letters. Around the board lay 6 or 7 small handmade dolls. Not toys, these were charnel little effigies, ragged, stitched with dark thread, some smeared with what must have been paint or something darker. Horror crawled up my spine as I noticed each doll had some gruesome mutilation. A missing limb crudely torn off, a gouged socket where an eye ought to be, a deep slit across a smiling cloth throat. The features on the dolls almost matched the faces in the photographs, distorted but unmistakable. Fighting panic, I backed away, nearly tripping over a broken floorboard. I remember the hush in the room, the blanketing sensation of being watched, even though I was alone. My curiosity overpowered my fear. Barely. There was a closet along the far wall. It's strange what compels us to look where we clearly shouldn't. The knob was slick, as if someone with greasy hands had gripped it recently. The hinges squeaked as I pulled the door open. That's when the odor slammed into me with such intensity that I dropped my flashlight. I saw, illuminated in the trembling beam, a heap of things that weren't supposed to be here. A jumbled pile of human bodies, rotting, shrouded in stained clothes. Flies, quick and lazy, traced dizzy circuits around their bruised, mottled skin. Their faces, bloated, ruined, but familiar from the wall of photos. Arms twisted, legs missing, one with his neck deeply slashed. The same mutilations as the dolls. My knees buckled, stomach heaving, the bile-thick taste of terror blanketing my tongue. My hands fumbled for my phone, desperate to gather evidence, but my clumsy fingers barely managed to turn on the camera. Just as I steadied myself to click pictures, Simon's panicked call vibrated in my pocket. Moreno was already back, heading for the door. I scrambled, heart pounding, plunging out the narrow back window in frantic silence. My pants ripped on the way down, but adrenaline erased the pain. We ran all the way to Simon's car, wordless, each glance at the house behind us a confirmation of our worst expectations. All night I reviewed the flashlight footage, but it was a jittery mess. The next morning, bracing myself with exhausted resolve, I decided to return in daylight. Rationally, I thought, maybe the light would reveal some trickery. Mannequins instead of bodies, paint instead of blood, some elaborate prop for an eccentric actor in hiding. But the house that morning was emptier than I could have imagined. Not just vacant, scrubbed of evidence. The front door was ajar, hinges swinging, but inside I found only dust motes, undisturbed furniture, fading outlines of frames where photographs once hung. The red lamp was gone. The boards on the floor were clean. In the back room, the closet stood open, empty as a tomb, only layered cobwebs and old newspapers, nothing more. No bodies, no dolls, no Ouija board. Not even the smell lingered, though I swear I can still catch whiffs of it in some corners of the memory. Maybe Moreno planted all that to scare off snoops like us, an actor's revenge on his tabloid voyeurs. Maybe I hallucinated, half asleep and half mad from those long, sleepless nights. Perhaps there's an explanation tangled somewhere between logic and fear. But some nights, when I walk alone in my apartment, I glimpse my shadow stretching out in the corridor, and I remember the hollow sockets of those dolls, the blank eyes from those ruined faces. I keep thinking that sometimes, when the air grows thick, I can still smell that metallic rot, lurking just out of sight. I tell myself it's only a trick of the mind, because I have to. Yet sometimes I hear a faint scraping sound outside my window, and I wonder if I ever really left that room, or if something from it followed me home. Story number 7. People think that Ouija boards are just a laugh, a party trick for bored teenagers. Even I used to think so. My job, after all, as a police officer, was to see through the tricks and stunts, make sense of chaos. Until July, until the night the woods changed everything. It was a suffocatingly hot afternoon, the air trembling in waves over cracked asphalt as our cruiser drove into the pines. Dispatch had received a call. Hikers had seen something strange. It wasn't a body, at least not initially, just an area cordoned off by yellow tape. Black and red liquid pooled everywhere. Bile and blood, I assumed, though a field test would reveal the black was some kind of ink or oil. Mixed, sticky, and impossible to fully wipe off my boots for days. In the center lay a cheap, battered Ouija board, its letters stained and its planchette missing. I told myself some group of idiots had staged a seance that went off the rails. We bagged everything. Later that evening, the board was cataloged and placed in the evidence room at the end of a long hallway that always smelled faintly of bleach and mold. The walls there seemed to swallow sound, so you hear your own breathing amplified, echoing back at you. Everything in that station is too old, too close to breaking down. The thunder rattled the windows that night, and the power was volatile. Around midnight, while working paperwork, I got a radio call from Jenkins. Needed case files on the Woods incident, the ones stored with the evidence. It was just a walk down the hallway, shouldn't have been anything. But as I neared the evidence room, the overhead lights started to flicker, the dull fluorescence wavering, then snapping away entirely, leaving me in an oily blackness, so complete my hands vanished from sight. Strangely, the evidence room door was open a crack, and a rectangle of sickly yellow light was pooled across the hall tiles. Somehow the light in there worked. There was a smell in that room, like burnt wax and metal polish. I stepped in and immediately saw the Ouija board was no longer shelved. It was sprawled on the cold linoleum, almost where my boot would have landed. There were no open windows, no drafts. Yet it must have slid out, I reasoned, or perhaps someone had come in earlier and forgotten to tidy up. It was the only plausible answer. Telling myself all this, I stooped and placed the board back in its plastic bag, then on the highest shelf. While sifting through boxes for the case files, I heard a gentle scrape outside. At first, I thought it was the scraping drag of rubber soles over tile, but then it grew sharper, as if something was dragged along metal, claws or nails. I opened the door, looked both ways, and saw only darkness. My own heart seemed to throw echoes down the corridor. I told myself it was old plumbing, or a cat maybe, prowling just outside where the storm battered the roof. That night at home, the events of the day clung to me like static. The next morning, stepping out to get coffee, I noticed something odd. A squirrel splayed, its paws pinned with broken twigs just above my mailbox. Its underside was open, but the cuts weren't jagged. No coyote, no hawk. They were neat, deliberate, like something dissected in a classroom. My first thought was a prank, probably from neighborhood kids. Kids do awful things to animals sometimes, but the arrangement unsettled me. Its glazed eyes stared right through me. I made coffee, shrugged it off, but as the sun rose, I found one chair in my dining room slashed down the center, clean as a razor cut. Then another, and a third. The deep gashes all angled the same way, the edges furry, with stuffing poking out. For a second, I imagined hands gripping the back of the chair, pantomiming violence, as if someone practiced a killing blow again and again, never quite striking flesh. My doors had all been locked. I checked them twice every night, a habit born of too many years on patrol. That night, sleep was something I chased but never caught. I jerked awake after an hour, throat raw and lungs searing, as if I'd been held underwater. My hands clawed at my neck. In the bathroom mirror, under the cold fluorescent glare, faint marks curled around my throat. Too thin for a man's hand, too uneven for something I'd done to myself. For 3 nights, I dreamed of hands I couldn't see, falling into endless dark water, with the board floating just out of reach. Unable to rest, I went back to the woods, attached to the case, but maybe also to something else, to see if there was any clue we'd missed. The woods felt different in daylight, less threatening, but the smell lingered, a sour, metallic tang of old blood and rain. The ground was still marred with old stains. And then, as I turned to leave, I saw him, a man dangling from the low branch of an old pine, rope biting into his swollen neck. His toes brushed the exact spot we'd found the Ouija board, black-red fluid dripping like oil. His clothes were faded, water-stained, though no recent missing persons case matched his face. He blinked once, then twice, and then there was nothing. My pulse banged in my ears, a hum like insects drilling my bones. I ran, stumbling through tangled undergrowth, but by the time I returned with Jenkins, there was only sunlight dappling empty grass. No body, no tree, just stumps and brambles. Jenkins patted my shoulder, concern clouding his eyes, and said I'd probably just seen shock, a trick of the mind. After all, trauma sites often provoke hallucinations. except there was no tree there, not even a spot where it could have been cut down overnight. I resigned a week after that, reported sick, boxed up my apartment, the finger marks on my neck faded, but the nightmares persisted. Boards on the floor, shapes forming in smoky mirrors, cold hands tightening around my throat while I slept. Rationally, I can explain most of it. Animal predation, pranks, sleep paralysis, stress. That's what I tell others. That's what I try to tell myself. And yet, when the house creaks at midnight or I catch the glint of a slick black-red stain in a gutter, every part of me expects to see that old fractured board, planchette spinning on its own, spelling out something just for me. People think Ouija boards are just for fun. They might be right, but I still keep all the lights on when I'm alone, just in case.